Prior to the 1800s, Ireland and Great Britain were two independent nations. Ireland was predominantly Catholic and Great Britain was Protestant. While they were independent, they were reliant on each other. For this video, keep in mind that red guys are British, blue guys are Protestant, white guys are Irish Catholic, and green guys are IRA members. In fear that the Irish would ally with the French, the British proposed the Act of Union, which would create the United Kingdom. The Irish were promised Catholic emancipation and some political power, along with the added benefits of being part of a world power, in exchange for putting themselves under British control. This union would plague Ireland with conflict to this day. At first it appeared that the Act of Union was going to be successful, but as time went on, Irish nationalism increased greatly, and the Catholics realized they were not going to get everything they wanted. Along with these came the desire for home rule and independence from the British. A political party called Sinn Féin was created in 1905 to represent these beliefs. Later on, this would become the political party associated with the IRA. However, the Protestant majority in Northern Ireland, also known as Ulster, did not want home rule and liked being unified with the British. This was largely due to the religious parallels between the two regions. In opposition to the Catholics who wanted to break away from the British, in 1913 they formed the Ulster Volunteers under Lord Carson. The Catholics saw this formation of the Ulster Volunteers, and to fight against the Protestants and the British, they would create their own violence forces, such as John Redmond's Irish Volunteers. At first, these groups were made up of average Irishmen who had no military training. Over time, these groups would ultimately form the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, and develop more advanced military techniques. Their first notable push for independence came in 1916 with the Easter Rising. During Easter week, the Irish Volunteers and other groups in favor of home rule came together to seize various locations around Dublin as well as other areas and declared Irish independence. At first the revolt was successful, but the Irish were out-armed and outnumbered when the British military showed up. Since the Irish were relatively unorganized, it was easy for the British to shut down the revolt and capture the leaders. At a later date, the leaders were executed.
While the Irish had been defeated, they were not giving up. 3 years after the Easter Rising, the Irish War of Independence began. Basically, this war involved Irish revolutionaries bombing important British buildings while the British did what they could to stop them. The Irish, however, could strike whenever they wanted and caused critical damage to the British, while resistance efforts towards them were futile. It was clear that the British needed some way to stop the destruction before it got out of hand, so they settled for the Anglo-Irish Treaty in 1921. This treaty split Ireland into Northern and Southern Ireland. The southern part was predominantly Catholic, so they were granted independence from Britain, but the northern part was 2/3 Protestant, and only 1/3 Catholic. So the 6 counties constituting Northern Ireland remained under British rule, along with limited home rule. This was certainly progress for the Irish freedom fighters, but for many it was not enough. The Catholics in Northern Ireland would stay under Protestant domination. The IRA wanted a unified Catholic Ireland. Civil war began in 1922 between those who were in favor of the treaty and those who wanted more. This war lasted under a year, resulting in the anti-treaty forces being defeated. The next 50 years would be relatively peaceful, and Northern Ireland enjoyed their limited home rule. There was some civil rights protesting by the Catholics and counter-protests by the Protestants, but no major events occurred again until 1969, when the IRA split into the official IRA, who did not want to use terrorism, and the PIRA, who realized terrorism was needed to get what they want. With the creation of the PIRA came the beginnings of the period called the Troubles, where 3 decades of fighting and destruction would ensue. On January 30th, 1972, thousands of Catholics were peacefully protesting for civil rights in Derry, Northern Ireland, when British soldiers opened fire upon them, similar to Tiananmen Square. That day would be remembered as Bloody Sunday. Only 13 people were killed, but it had a much bigger impact than just the death of 13 innocent people. It sparked resentment and deeper animosity towards the British, and boosted Irish nationalism and support for Irish independence. Instead of scaring the Catholics, it simply unified them against British rule. Later that year, Britain would take home rule away from the Irish Protestants and assume direct rule because of Northern Ireland's inability to control the conflict. This was just 2 years into the Troubles. 6 months after Bloody Sunday, with the image still etched in their minds, the IRA sought revenge. On July 21st, within an hour and a half, they detonated 22 bombs all over the capital of Northern Ireland, Belfast. This was retaliation for the wrongdoing of Bloody Sunday, resulting in the deaths of 9 people and leaving 130 injured. The IRA demonstrated their usual tactics: willingness but reluctance to kill, and intending to cause destruction. This act of terrorism was harshly criticized.
After only a year or more of fighting, both sides were ready to come to an agreement. What they decided upon was the Sunningdale Agreement. This attempted to solve the conflict by giving Catholics some power in Northern Irish government. With shared power in Northern Ireland, this compromise seemed promising as a solution to the conflict, but the Protestants were determined to keep control. The Ulster Working Council went on a 2-week strike in opposition to the Sunningdale Agreement. Ultimately, their strike was successful because soon after, Ulster reverted to its state of previous direct rule. This shows the effectiveness of nonviolent protesting, coupled with some political punch to back it up. It also describes how deep the conflict runs. Neither side would settle for compromise. 10 years into the Troubles, the British publicly announced that they were winning the war against the Irish, which obviously offended the IRA. They wanted to prove to everyone that they were certainly not losing the war and that they were showing no signs of surrendering anytime soon. In order to do so, they would assassinate Lord Mountbatten, the British Viceroy of India. They would do so by bombing his boat while he was on vacation. They proved their point and scared the British. IRA also organized several protests, which included dirty protest. This is when prisoners refuse to wash themselves or the sheets. They also cover their cell walls with feces. This event ended with the hunger strikes in 1981, when 10 Catholics, including Bobby Sands, refused to eat while in prison. While striking, Sands was elected to Parliament, but he died after 66 days of not eating. This again illustrated their determination to gain independence. They continued to try to scare the British government by attempting to assassinate their Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. They planted a bomb in her room at the Brighton Hotel 3 months prior to her visit. When the bomb exploded, she escaped unharmed, but a few members of her staff were killed. After the attempt failed, the IRA was quoted saying, "Today we were unlucky, but remember, we only have to be lucky once. You will have to be lucky always. Give Ireland peace and there will be no more war." The IRA repeatedly bombed the same financial district in London in 1993. Many officials said that they were unprepared for this attack. Although only 1 person died, there was estimated to be over 1 billion English pounds of damage done. This is a perfect example of the IRA's willingness to kill for a financial impact.
In 1997, the IRA decided that they had had enough of violent terror-filled attempt for independence, so they started to show interest in reaching a peace agreement. Not everyone agreed with this, and this resulted in the second major split of the IRA as the RIRA broke off from the PIRA. The RIRA wanted to continue the armed struggle for independence, and the PIRA wanted to pursue peace. In 1998, the Belfast Agreement was signed. The Belfast Agreement, also known as the Good Friday Agreement, was another attempt at a compromise and shared political power within Northern Ireland. This was much more successful than the Sunningdale Agreement and will lead to more steps toward a peaceful Ireland. In 2005, the IRA declared the ending of its arms campaign. They have not yet changed their beliefs about Ireland, but they have sincerely apologized for the damage they caused, and understand that continuing their fight is unnecessary. Currently, Northern Ireland remains a part of Britain and Southern Ireland is still independent. So, what have we learned? The story of the IRA reveals an ultimate futility of terrorism. After nearly 100 years of bloody and bomb-filled conflict, they ended with nothing more than what they achieved in the early stages of their struggle. In the beginning of the 20th century, they began fighting for independence, and 20 years later, they would achieve partial independence. They had not even started to employ their most destructive and influential terrorist tactics yet, and they were already making progress. However, over the next 80 years, they would amplify their tactics and kill more people, but they would never make any more substantial steps toward independence. Basically, 80 years of murder, destruction, and conflict were all for nothing. The IRA may have had the just cause, but their tactics were not the best. During the Ulster Working Council strike, we see the effectiveness of peaceful but influential protesting against the terrorism of the IRA. Today, even the IRA recognized the mistakes that they made.